Missouri, the land where more than 90 death row inmates have walked down cold, narrow halls to face their final moments. Among them, 10 of the most brutal have left chilling scars through inexplicable crimes, murdering children, wiping out entire families, and killing without reason. When justice closed in, they had nowhere left to run. All that remained was a simple, final meal. And the last words, sometimes eerie silence, sometimes sentences that haunted witnesses long after the execution. What did they eat before leaving this world? What did they say or choose not to say in their final moments? Join me as we step into the first case, a crime that stole the childhood of a little girl, only 9 years old. First, Christopher Collings. On the night of November 3rd, 2007, in Stella, a small town in Missouri, 9-year-old Rowan Ford disappeared from her home while her mother was working a night shift. The search for her stretched on in desperate hope for days, until her body was found in a remote cave in McDonald County. Forensic evidence showed that Rowan had suffered severe trauma before her death. Christopher Collings, a family acquaintance who had lived with Rowan's family during the summer and early fall of 2007, quickly drew the attention of investigators. At first, Collings appeared cooperative, but inconsistencies in his statements and his refusal to meet investigators' eyes led authorities to increase the pressure. Meanwhile, Rowan's stepfather, David Spears, also raised suspicion with his behavior, prompting police to focus their investigation on both men. Under mounting pressure, Collings confessed. On that tragic night, after drinking heavily, he brought Rowan to his trailer home on family property in Wheaton. In a disturbed state, Collings committed a horrific assault on the young girl, fearing she could identify him. He then used an old rope to end her life. It did not stop there. Collings and David Spears, who later admitted to being involved, worked together to hide Rowan's body. They carried her to a secluded cave in McDonald County, covering her with leaves and debris in a failed attempt to conceal their crime. But time and silence could not outrun justice. Forensic evidence, confessions, and clues from the scene slowly peeled back the layers of deception. Spears even led authorities to the hidden site where Rowan's heavily decomposed body was found, sparking a wave of deep sorrow in the community. In 2012, a jury sentenced Collings to death, a heavy sentence seen as necessary to close a dark chapter. On December 3rd, 2024, at the Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Christopher Collings faced his final moment, lethal injection in a cold, silent room. His last meal was strikingly simple: a bacon and cheese sandwich, fried mushrooms, French fries, and a chef's salad. Before closing his eyes, Collings delivered his final words in heavy silence. "I hope everyone can find closure and move forward. No matter which side of this you are on, you are in my prayers." In the dim, yellow light and fading breath, Missouri closed another sorrowful chapter 1, where a terrible crime had forever stolen the childhood of an innocent child. Second, Marcellus Williams. On August 11th, 1998, in a quiet neighborhood of University City, Missouri, Felicia Gale, a former reporter who had left journalism to devote herself to charity work, was murdered inside her own home. What had been a peaceful refuge became the scene of a crime that shook the community to its core. Marcellus Williams, a man with a criminal history of theft and assault, quickly became a prime suspect. Investigators found no DNA linking Williams directly to the murder weapon, a kitchen knife taken from Felicia's own home. However, circumstantial evidence began to form a compelling chain. Williams was found in possession of Felicia's stolen laptop, and both a former cellmate and an ex-girlfriend testified that he had confessed to the crime. According to case records, Williams had broken in intending to steal, but unexpectedly, he encountered Felicia Gale, who had just finished showering. In a panic, he grabbed a weapon from the kitchen and launched a brutal attack, leaving Felicia dead at the scene. The savagery of the crime was reflected in the number of wounds recorded, shocking even the most seasoned investigators, arrested based on physical evidence and witness testimony. Williams consistently denied all charges. He and his legal team fought hard to request advanced DNA testing. Pointing out that the DNA found on the weapon did not match his, Felicia Gale's family even expressed a desire that authorities refrain from carrying out the execution, believing that the full truth had not yet come to light. Despite this, after multiple appeals, both federal and state courts upheld the death sentence, concluding that the circumstantial evidence was sufficient to convict. On September 24, 2024, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Marcellus Williams was brought into the execution chamber, the method lethal injection technically smooth, yet heavy with the weight of every final breath. For his last meal, he chose simple comfort foods, chicken wings, and tater tots, as if trying to cling to an ordinary moment. His final words echoed quietly in the frozen air. All praise is due to Allah in all circumstances. And then, as the light faded, the debates over guilt and justice continued to ripple silently through Missouri like a question that was never fully answered. Third, Amber McLaughlin. On the evening of November 20th, 2003, Beverly Gunther, a dedicated administrative worker living in St. Louis County, Missouri, did not return home as usual. Her family found her car still parked outside her workplace, but Beverly herself had vanished. Amber McLaughlin, then known by birth name Scott McLaughlin, had once been romantically involved with Beverly. After their breakup, McLaughlin persistently stalked, harassed, and even broke into Beverly's home, defying multiple restraining orders. The fear Beverly had documented in court filings was tragically not enough to save her. According to case records, that night, McLaughlin ambushed Beverly outside her workplace. In the suffocating darkness, McLaughlin committed a fatal act of violence, then abandoned Beverly's body in a patch of overgrown weeds near a deserted trail. The evidence against McLaughlin did not come from a confession, but from a disturbing pattern stalking, breaking, and entering, threats, and Beverly's sudden, unexplained disappearance, all pieced together by witness accounts, traces, and abnormal behavior before and after the crime. In 2006, during trial, the jury could not unanimously decide on the death penalty under Missouri law. When a jury is deadlocked, the judge has the authority to impose the sentence. As a result, McLaughlin was sentenced to death. In the years that followed, within the cold walls of prison, McLaughlin completed a gender transition, becoming Amber McLaughlin the first openly transgender woman to be executed in the United States. On January 3, 2023, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Amber McLaughlin faced her final fate, lethal injection, unfolding quietly, like a destiny long sealed. For her last meal, Amber chose a bacon and cheese sandwich, French fries, a strawberry milkshake, and a packet of peanut M&Ms, simple comforts reaching for a final moment of peace. As the dim light spread across the room, Amber's final words trembled into the air. "I am sorry for what I did. I am a loving and caring person." And then, the light faded away, leaving behind haunting questions about love, about guilt, and about the ultimate judgments human beings pass upon one another. Fourth, Brian Dorsey. On the night of December 23, 2006, as Christmas lights brightened every small corner of New Bloomfield, Missouri, a silent crime unfolded behind quiet walls. Brian Dorsey, a cousin of Sarah Bonney, was drowning in desperate drug debts. In his despair, he called Sarah and Ben Bonney, seeking help. With kindness and no suspicion, the Bonneys welcomed Dorsey into their home, opening their door to a night they could never have foreseen. According to investigative records, as night fell and the house slipped into sleep, Dorsey quietly retrieved a handgun from the garage. In a moment he could never undo. He entered the bedroom and committed an act of extreme violence, ending the lives of both Sarah and Ben Bonney. The tragedy did not stop there. After taking the lives of those who had shown him compassion, Dorsey also violated Sarah's body, a heartbreaking detail recorded quietly in the forensic reports. In the aftermath, he attempted to clean the scene with bleach, stole valuables, and left the house, leaving behind the Bonnies' 4-year-old daughter, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the horror that had occurred. 3 days later, Brian Dorsey turned himself in and confessed to the crime. In 2008, despite pleading guilty, Dorsey was sentenced to death, a verdict reflecting both the severity and betrayal embodied in his actions. On April 9, 2024, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Brian Dorsey faced his final sentence, lethal injection, a process smooth on the surface, yet crushing with each final breath. His last meal reflected a hollow greed: 2 bacon cheeseburgers, 2 orders of fried chicken, 2 large servings of French fries, and a pizza loaded with sausage, pepperoni, onions, mushrooms, and melted cheese. In his final moments, Brian Dorsey left behind heavy words of regret. "There are no words to fully express the shame and guilt I feel." And then, as his final breath vanished into the cold air, Missouri closed another sorrowful chapter where kindness was betrayed, and pain lingered far beyond the prison walls. 5th, Leonard Taylor. In the early days of November 2004, the Jennings area of Missouri was awash in the colors of late autumn, but inside a small house, an ominous silence began to spread, a silence that spoke louder than words. Angela Rowe, 28 years old, and her 3 young children, Alexis, Akrea, and Tyrese, suddenly stopped answering calls from family and friends. Doors remained closed. Worry grew heavy in the close-knit community. A few days later, during a welfare check, police found the bodies of Angela and her 3 children inside the house, a scene frozen in tragedy. Their deaths were determined to have occurred several days prior, under circumstances marked by extreme violence. Leonard Taylor, Angela's former boyfriend, quickly became the prime suspect. Evidence, including witness testimony, travel records, and indirect confessions, gradually painted a grim picture. The investigation revealed that Taylor had been with the victims around the time of their deaths. Afterward, he fled Missouri for California, where authorities eventually tracked him down. Taylor insisted on his innocence, claiming that when he left, Angela and the children were still alive, and that everything was a terrible misunderstanding. Even in the face of execution, Taylor continued to maintain his claims. The jury was not convinced. In 2008, Leonard Taylor was sentenced to death for the loss of 4 innocent lives. On February 7, 2023, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center in Missouri, Leonard Taylor faced his final moment. The method lethal injection silent, where even final words were swallowed by the air. His last meal reflected a final grasp at earthly pleasures, a seafood platter, a cheeseburger, French fries, cheesecake, and vanilla ice cream. In his final hour, Taylor showed no plea, no fear. His last words echoed through the quiet chamber: "Death is not your enemy. It is your destiny. Look forward to meeting it. Peace." And so, Leonard Taylor closed the final chapter of a tear-stained story where the silenced could not speak, and the one responsible denied until the very last breath. 6th, Joseph Paul Franklin. In the late 1970s, America was rocked by a series of sudden, deadly attacks stretching from Ohio and Tennessee to Missouri. Behind these scattered crimes stood Joseph Paul Franklin, a white supremacist extremist, fueled by a deep, simmering hatred born from racist ideology. Franklin considered himself a lone warrior, unaffiliated with any official extremist groups, but carrying out his self-proclaimed mission to purify society from what he saw as racial mixing, obsessed with white supremacy. Franklin targeted Black individuals, Jewish people, and interracial couples. He acted coldly, without warning, without mercy, leaving shattered families and stunned communities in his wake. Among his many attacks, one crime in particular shook Missouri. On October 8, 1977, Gerald Gordon, a Jewish man, was shot and killed by Franklin outside a synagogue in St. Ado, Lewis County. Following a religious service, the attack did not only take a life, it sowed deep fear within the local Jewish community. A chilling reminder that hatred could tear through even the safest spaces without warning. Franklin did not stop in Missouri. He moved swiftly across dozens of states, changing his appearance, using multiple aliases, committing crimes, and vanishing like a phantom. His unpredictable movements made him an elusive target for both federal and state law enforcement. It took years of coordinated, persistent efforts before Franklin was finally captured in 1980. In Kentucky, he was charged in multiple jurisdictions for a string of murders, including the high-profile shootings of Larry Flynt, a well-known publisher, and Vernon Jordan, a civil rights leader, both of whom survived but suffered severe injuries. Ultimately, Franklin was tried and sentenced to death in Missouri for the murder of Gerald Gordon, a crime prosecutors described as purely driven by racial hatred. During his long years on death row, Franklin occasionally expressed vague remorse in interviews, claiming he no longer believed in racial hatred. Yet, in other statements, he continued to reveal extremist views, conflicting with the regret he sometimes attempted to display. On November 20th, 2013, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Missouri, Joseph Paul Franklin faced his final sentence, lethal injection, closing the chapter on a life steeped in violence and hatred. Unlike many death row inmates, Franklin refused a final meal, a silent choice, without explanation. In his final moments, he offered no last words. His cold, empty silence reflected the path he had chosen, a path without explanation, without redemption. 7th, Ernest Lee Johnson. On a quiet February night in 1994, the city of Columbia, Missouri, was shaken by a silent, painful tragedy. Ernest Lee Johnson, a man burdened by mental illness and drug addiction, had planned to rob a Casey's General Store, a place he frequented. But that night, the crime went far beyond theft. According to investigative records, under the influence of substances, Johnson killed 3 night shift employees, Mary Bratcher, Fred Jones, and Mabel Scruggs, with brutal violence. The event stunned Columbia, a university town unaccustomed to such horror. After the crime, Johnson attempted to hide his actions. However, forensic evidence and security footage quickly led investigators to him. He was arrested shortly thereafter and confessed to his involvement. Over the following years, Johnson's legal team raised numerous arguments regarding his mental state. They emphasized that part of Johnson's brain had been surgically removed during a 2008 operation to treat a brain tumor, significantly impairing his cognitive function and impulse control. Human rights organizations, including the United Nations and several international advocacy groups, called on Missouri to grant clemency, citing protections for individuals with intellectual disabilities against capital punishment. Despite these appeals, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that Johnson remained capable of understanding his actions and the consequences of his crime. On October 5th, 2021, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Ernest Lee Johnson faced his final moment lethal injection, closing more than 2 decades of legal battles. For his last meal, Johnson chose everyday comfort foods, 2 bacon cheeseburgers, a serving of pizza, and a milkshake. In his final breaths, Johnson's last words were not of protest or justification. He spoke softly, "I am sorry and regret what I did. I love my family and friends, and I am thankful for all those who supported me." In the dim light of the execution chamber, Missouri closed another chapter marked by controversy, a chapter grappling with justice, mercy, and the fragile line between guilt and redemption. 8. Carman Deck. on an early evening in July 1996, as 4th of July fireworks lit up Missouri's skies. A silent tragedy unfolded in DeSoto, leaving behind wounds that would never heal. Carman Deck, then 30 years old, with a criminal record stretching back to his teenage years, had planned to break into the home of James and Zelma Long, an elderly couple living modestly. To carry out the plan, Deck and his sister pretended to ask for directions, gaining an invitation into the house. Once they crossed the threshold of the Longs' home, Deck pulled a gun and threatened the elderly couple. He forced Zelma to open the safe, stealing about $200 in cash along with a few pieces of jewelry. Then, Deck ordered James and Zelma to lie face down on the bed. After nearly 10 agonizing minutes of hesitation and frantic thoughts, he committed brutal violence, ending both their lives, two kind souls who had only offered help to strangers. Deck fled the scene but was arrested that same night. Inside his vehicle, police found the Longs' cash box and other stolen items. At the police station, Deck confessed fully through spoken statements, written accounts, and recorded interviews. In 1998, Carman Deck was sentenced to death. However, due to procedural errors including being shackled in front of the jury and failures by his defense team, the sentence was overturned twice. Finally, in 2008, after a third trial, the death sentence was reinstated. Over nearly 3 decades, Deck and his legal team fought for clemency, citing his traumatic childhood severe abuse, deep poverty, and victimization while in juvenile detention. Yet all appeals were denied. On May 3, 2022, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Carman Deck faced his final sentence, lethal injection silent. Like the tears never shed for his victims, Deck's final meal reflected surprising simplicity. A ribeye steak, grilled shrimp, steamed asparagus, a mixed salad with Italian dressing, cottage cheese, and a glass of V8 juice. In his final moments, Deck left behind a written statement, heavy with reflection. My hope is that someday the world will find peace, and that we all learn to be kind and love one another, give love, show love, be love. In the under the faded yellow lights, those last words echoed like a late prayer, naming the love he had once so violently torn away. 9th, Kevin Johnson, Jr. On the afternoon of July 5, 2005, in Kirkwood, Missouri, a tragic incident unfolded rooted in long-standing tensions between a struggling community and law enforcement. Kevin Johnson, Jr., then 19 years old, was under heavy pressure, a precarious life, previous legal troubles, and deep family pain, especially the fragile health of his younger brother, Joseph Bam Bam Long, 12 years old. That afternoon, Kirkwood police officers arrived at Johnson's home to serve a warrant for a probation violation. While the officers were there, Joseph suffered a seizure. Some witnesses later claimed that the officers failed to assist in a timely manner. Joseph was taken to the hospital but did not survive. In Kevin's eyes, his brother's death was the final breaking point. Sinking into grief and fury, a few hours later, Johnson encountered Officer William McEntee, a veteran officer who had been part of the earlier police response. In uncontrollable rage, Johnson committed a violent act, taking McEntee's life, ending the career of a dedicated public servant with over 20 years of service. The investigation quickly identified Johnson as the prime suspect. After fleeing, he surrendered 2 days later. At trial, prosecutors argued that Johnson's actions were premeditated revenge. His defense team emphasized the overwhelming emotional trauma he endured after losing his brother, highlighting the hardships that had shaped his life. In 2007, Kevin Johnson was sentenced to death. However, the case continued to stir controversy for years, with allegations of racial bias in the prosecution and trial process, despite support from human rights groups and social activists. All clemency efforts failed. On November 29, 2022, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Kevin Johnson, Jr. faced his final moment lethal injection in a room weighed down by unanswered questions. Johnson declined a final meal. In his last moments, he whispered to his spiritual advisor, Reverend Darrell Gray, heavy words of regret. He apologized to the victim's family. He apologized to his own family, and he said he was looking forward to seeing his little brother. He said he was ready. As the light in the chamber dimmed, Missouri closed another painful chapter where justice, grief, and helplessness intertwined into a knot not easily undone. 10. Michael Anthony Taylor. On a spring morning in 1989, in Kansas City, Missouri, the disappearance of 15-year-old Ann Harrison marked the beginning of one of the most shocking criminal cases in the state's history. Ann Harrison, a vibrant and promising high school student, was waiting for her school bus near her home when she was abducted. Within hours, her family reported her missing, clinging to desperate hope, but that hope was soon shattered. Michael Anthony Taylor, along with accomplice Roderick Nunley, carried out a grim plan. They kidnapped Ann, took her to a house where she was held captive, assaulted, and ultimately killed in an act of extreme violence. Ann's body was found in the trunk of an abandoned car, a heartbreaking scene that left the local community in shock. The investigation quickly pointed to Taylor and Nunley as the prime suspects. Both men were arrested, and during interrogations, they confessed fully to their crimes. Taylor stood trial in the early 1990s. Overwhelming evidence, coupled with his confession, left the jury little doubt. They sentenced him to death. Over the next 2 decades, Taylor pursued numerous appeals, citing ineffective counsel and requesting re-examinations of the evidence. Yet, through it all, the death sentence remained intact. On February 26, 2014, at Bonne Terre Correctional Center, Missouri, Michael Anthony Taylor faced his final moment. The method-lethal injection, a procedure he once challenged as potentially causing unnecessary pain, but which ultimately proceeded without delay. Taylor declined a special last meal. Instead, he was served the standard prison meal, potato soup and a sandwich, before the injection. Taylor gave no final statement, only a heavy, oppressive silence filled the room. In that moment, Missouri closed another tragic chapter where a young girl's bright future was stolen away, and justice, though delivered, could never truly heal the irreparable loss. 10 stories, 10 darker memories etched deep into the soil of Missouri. Crimes punished, lives ended, and questions left hanging in the cold air. Was justice truly served, or was it just another cycle of pain? If these stories moved you, please like this video, leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another raw glimpse into the dark side of justice. Stories like these, are far from over.